travelling with the Bernina Express on the highest railway line over the Alps. Over 196 bridges, the mountain railway fights its way through ice and snow. Daring routing and the wild Grison landscape guarantee a spectacular crossing of the Alps. The story began in 1898. In 12 years, the single-track narrow-gauge network was built by different companies through the middle of the Swiss high mountains. Today, the railway runs on 170 kilometers of tracks, from Graubünden in the north to Italy in the south. Amidst the natural forces of the Grison Alps lies Chur, the oldest city in Switzerland. This is the starting point of the famous railway on its way to Italy. Locomotive driver Pat Carvelti has been riding the line for over 10 years. It takes him about 4 hours to cross the Alps. He knows the dangers very well. Above all, the weather and the mountains can always come up with a surprise.
Every working day of ours is special because we have the beautiful nature that changes every day. The mountains. Now in winter, the situation always needs to be reassessed. We drive past the slopes of the mountains. Falling rocks would be a possible danger or sometimes a slide.
Campbell Castle marks the first part of the route and the entrance to the Shin Gorge. The dark valley could only be conquered with a route through the mountain. The unstable rock made tunnel construction difficult. It was not until 1890 that railway engineers opened up southeastern Switzerland. It was originally planned for freight traffic only, a dangerous route. Even the Romans feared the Alte Shin. Then, as now, there was a danger of landslides. The journey from the shady side of the wild gorge to the sunny slopes of the Albula valley is breathtaking. The Solis viaduct crosses the Albula, which rushes through the valley 85 meters below. Today, the same quarries still supply the material for repair work on bridges, viaducts and tunnels. But not every stone is hard enough. Quarry operator Hans-Peter Salzgeber knows what to look out for.
Bridges mainly have to withstand the weather, natural influences. And that is rain, snow, ice, water. And there it's extremely important that the water is not stored in the stone and splits off when it freezes. That gives the lifespan. There are stones that you can impose a will on, but with this stone it's rather the other way around. It can be worked into very much, but only according to its will. And it's actually like that in the whole region. You look where the bridges go or where the dangers are, like avalanches, and you check where it's safe. The whole area is like the stone. It's a transformation.
Das ist die ganze Gegend, wie der Stein. Es ist ein Wandel. Man erkennt das gut, dass das ein guter, gesunder Stein ist.
You recognize that it's a good, healthy stone. The color, the compactness shows you. Maybe a few meters next to this quarry zone is a normal Grison slate. You can't work with it, it decays. But this stone remains compact. And already back then, the people found out.
The Solis viaduct is one of the first elastically dimensioned stone viaducts. This construction method makes it possible to design parabolic and slender vaults. The framework, an early work by the legendary Richard Koray. As early as 1902, the highest bridge on the Rhaetian Railway was worth a proud 125,000 Swiss francs to the Swiss. St. George once saved himself from his pursuers with a mighty leap of his horse, one of the many legends that still surrounds the myth-enshrouded route. With a maximum gradient of 3.5% and extremely slowly, the Bernina Express passes this section.
The first train in the morning makes a run here on site to see if there's no stone on the track here, because this mountain is slate-like and not necessarily the most stable. There's always something small crumbling off.
As recently as 2014, a train carrying 140 people was hit by a landslide on this section. The UNESCO World Heritage Route begins in Thusis. The train runs along the Albula, the namesake of the so-called Albula line. It connects the Hinterrhein with the Engadin. About 40 kilometers after Chur, the town of Tiefenkastel marks the railway's entry into the Albula Alps region. On its way through the Albula valley, the train passes Brienz. Above the village, rock masses start moving faster and faster. But this is not the only threat. The community is doubly endangered. It lies on a slab that is sliding, tearing everything down into the abyss. Giorgin Bonifazi is a farmer in Brienz. His meadows and pastures are being swept into the depths by the slide, a dangerous stumbling block for people and animals. He is afraid he will lose everything: his house, his land, and his animals.
Here, this is a little example of what's going on in the meadows. There are waves in it, and then over time, right now, the ground is frozen, but there's actually a hole in here. Then there are cracks, and at the top we have a layer of humus, usually 15 to 20 centimeters, and at some point it breaks apart, and at the bottom it's just hollow. These are examples that we have many times in the meadows. These are very typical cracks that develop in the road. They start small, and after 2 to 3 weeks, it can be seen on the whole road. And that's a typical effect of our earth movement. Back there, it has more resistance. Then the ground bulges up, and here the whole thing sinks. And these are cracks. They're extreme, and it has become so extreme in the last 2 years. Of course, there are brutal effects. It will tear the whole building apart over time.
Giorgin Bonifazi has deep concerns. Even though scientists are trying to stop the mountain with new methods, there is no rescue in sight yet.
This is one of the many cracks that can be seen all over the village. And this is due to the movement that we have underground. At the moment, we have up to 1.20 meters of movement per year, and that, of course, leaves its mark. Up there, where the sun shines in, That's where the edge is. As long as it breaks off one by one, about 100 cubic meters per time, it's not a big danger. The worst thing would be if it all came down at once. If we assume the very bad scenario that is predicted, then we're talking about 20 million cubic meters, an unimaginable amount. Then it goes further down to the railroad line. It even buries the Albula. And then there is a backlog as far as Surava. That would be a horror scenario. But it cannot be completely ruled out, unfortunately. The railroad line must be constantly adjusted with our landslide, because it is one slope. That's the big problem. All the people are very challenged by the infrastructure everywhere.
In the worst case, the rock masses would not only bury the village, but plunge deep down into the Albula valley and destroy the railway line. It would be the most dramatic rockfall in Switzerland. The Albula line of the Bernina Express stretches from Thusis via Tiefenkastel to St. Moritz. The nearly 62-kilometre line is one of the most spectacular narrow-gauge railways in the world. Even when it was built over 100 years ago, the landscape was considered extraordinarily beautiful, and the railway had to fit into it. The diversity of the wildly romantic but also gloomy and lonely Albula Valley can be experienced on the train journey. In the middle of the valley lies the farm of Marcel Heinrich. He has specialized in the cultivation of mountain potatoes. Despite the climatic challenges, his love of nature has kept this mountain farmer going for over 20 years.
After all, I grew up here on this farm, and whenever I leave, it doesn't take long for me to get homesick. This winter was a very strange winter. There was snow, then it melted again, then it rained again. It's certainly not going to be easy in the future, especially in our valleys. That's going to affect us a lot. We have set up a little paradise here on the farm. We started early with agritourism, had crazy ideas. Meanwhile, we market over 46 old potato varieties. We had ideals, which we pursued, also with a certain naivety, but in the end we muddled through. As a farmer, you are most affected by the weather. The weather is becoming more and more extreme. In the summer, it's extremely hot. Then, in the fall, we had an extremely long period of precipitation that has not stopped. It also remains constant. The heat remains relatively long. The rain remains long. And that has a strong impact on us. We really feel that the climate is changing. There are still people who say that this also existed in the past, but I think that slowly but surely, even the last person notices that something is coming, which is of course very scary and means a very uncertain future, especially here in the alpine region where we are.
Marcel Heinrich is a pioneer who won't let the changing climate stop him. The railway engineers in the 19th century also had to come up with something to conquer the Albula Valley. Their elaborate railway constructions are still stone witnesses of courage and innovation today. The stone bridges of the Albula railway were the beginning of a renaissance of stone bridge building in Switzerland. With its 65-metre-high, upward tapering piers, the Landwasser viaduct is one of the most elegant bridge structures in Graubünden. After 106 years, the masonry was repaired for the first time. The three main piers of the viaduct are an architectural masterpiece, as they were built without scaffolding, using 2 cranes. The natural stone viaduct, made of limestone dolomite, is 142 metres long and leads in a sweeping curve over the wild Landwasser valley directly into a tunnel. The breathtaking sight of this bridge has become the canton's flagship. For some lovers of the line, the Landwasser viaduct is the real landmark of Graubünden. Retired train driver Jean Caprez knows the history of the railway well. He reminds us of the dangers.
Tunnel construction was particularly dangerous during railway construction. Even more so at that time. It's dark, noisy, toxic gases from the explosions. There is no room at all. Some are on their way to the construction site on foot, bringing material. Right next door, invisible, a construction train rumbles along. If you're not careful, you'll end up under the wheels. In between, engineers want to take measurements. That's insanely dangerous. Most of the deaths happened, as they said at the time, through carelessness. So if someone didn't hear the work train after a long day's work and got run over, it was his fault. Others were killed by rocks falling, especially after a blast. Those were the dangers at that time.
The Bergüner Stein blocked the passage to the village of Bergün until 1696. Currently, the tunnel is being renovated. As a protective measure for travellers, brooms are attached to the tunnel entrance so that no one bumps their head when the windows are open. Construction worker Markus Alisch also takes care of the brooms, which ensure safety in the tunnel during construction work.
The brooms are there because the train has open windows and people look out, and the brooms come into profile and they get hit by the broom as a safety measure. Then they have to put their head in, otherwise it would be even more dangerous in the tunnel.
Seemingly insurmountable problems made it difficult for engineers to build the legendary Albula line at the time. To succeed, they had to find the right way through the extremely narrow valley. Many tunnel workers died during construction. In the Bergün cemetery, there is also a memorial stone for the German engineer Heinrich Perbs. He lost his life trying to rescue workers buried in a tunnel accident. From Bergün, the train makes its way to Preda, in the upper valley of the Albula Alps. To do so, it has to climb 416 metres in altitude, too steep for a direct way up. A solution in the mountain had to be found.
So here we go in, and up there we come out again. And that's where we're in now, and that's where we'll be when we come back out. Now we do the 360 degrees inside the mountain to gain altitude.
To overcome the difference in height, the railroad engineers used helical tunnels several times. This means that the rail line had to be extended additionally and winds its way through the valley in several loops. Passengers were not meant to spend their time in the tunnel, but to see the wild and romantic landscape. That's why engineers were looking for a safe route through open terrain as early as 1900. The high snow makes the road impassable for cars. It is only good for sledging in winter. That's why the railway line is vital for survival, especially in winter. A total of 4 viaducts were built to bring the railway safely through the valley. Because of the curves and loops, it changes sides of the valley several times along the way. The viaducts protect against floods and especially against avalanches. In the Zuondra spiral tunnel, the Bernina Express winds its way upward one last time. When changing direction in the dark, one quickly loses orientation. This solution to the line problems with helical tunnels is as ingenious as it is confusing. Seemingly created for eternity, the Albula Massif appears. Here, the Albula tunnel digs 100 meters deep through the Graubünden Alps. But the mountain world is changing. Ice, water, and the pressure of the towering mountains are taking their toll on the structure. The 100-year-old tunnel must be secured for the future. At the same time, a new tunnel is being built. The old Albula tunnel takes over an important function as a safety tunnel. The builders of this railway line have achieved almost the impossible, to cut a path through the high mountains, the home not only of people but also of animals.
Exactly in this section we have very frequent game crossing. You always have to expect deer or roe deer near the tracks. In this season, when there is snow, they are looking for food, and the food is of course always in the valley. In the process, they also cross the tracks. When deer are on the tracks, if you whistle like that, it's like a dog barking. Then they start jumping, and then you mustn't stop. That's how you usually manage not to hit any.
The Swiss Alps attract travellers from all over the world. The bold mountain railway transports some 12 million tourists and commuters through Graubünden every year. Spa guests love to travel the Alps comfortably by train, even in winter. That wasn't always the case. In the beginning, rail operations were dormant during the cold season. Only when the English discovered the pleasures of skiing did winter tourism arrive. Their favourite hobby, horse racing, therefore takes place every year on Lake St. Moritz, as long as it is frozen deep enough. A spectacle not only attended by Swiss celebrities. The mayor, Christian J. Jenny, is happy about the winter hustle and bustle.
The point is this: the English were a bit bored here 100 years ago, and out of boredom, they invented such things as ski-joring.
On March the 1st, 1906, ski-joring was introduced in St. Moritz, At minute intervals, riders standing wobbly on skis let themselves be pulled by unmounted horses galloping along.
You're at home here in a fairy tale-like setting, and the fact that they built this track here more than 100 years ago is bordering on miraculous. It's not even conceivable anymore in terms of monument protection or nature conservation, let alone the people who built it, who lost their lives. But of course it's ingenious.
It wasn't until the railway was built that the area was developed and opened up to new influences. Today, the whole region depends on tourism and on the trains arriving safely at their destination. From St. Moritz, the train travels over the Bernina Pass up to Alp Grüm. Not only is it considered the highest train over the Alps, but it's also one of the steepest railways in the world, with a gradient of up to 7%. The next stop is Morteratsch in the Upper Engadine. Swiss researchers here are running a 2.5 million franc project to save the glaciers. The Morteratsch glacier is to grow again. It used to reach as far as the railway line, but in the last 20 years it has retreated by about 20 kilometers due to climate change. The ambitious project aims to develop a method of preserving Graubünden's largest glacier as a freshwater reservoir for future generations. Glaciologist Felix Keller wants to go beyond that, even make the glacier grow. A weather station helps him to check the effects of climate on the ice.
Wind speed has gone up extremely. Shortwave radiation, longwave radiation, temperature in the snow.
He wants to know what climatic conditions are causing the glacier to melt today.
The idea is really quite simple. In summer, on a hot day, the Morteratsch glacier loses up to 1 million tons of ice a day. And that's when a lot of ice melts. This means that a lot of meltwater flows off. And if we keep it up in summer, we can freeze it again in winter, when it's as cold as it is now. We're talking about meltwater recycling. Actually, a very simple approach.
The glacier has to be covered with snow all year round to prevent further retreat, because without ice, the weather at Morteratsch can trigger hazards.
The glacier retreat is releasing very large amounts of debris here at the moment. On the one hand, these are transported away by the river during floods and can trigger flood hazards. But there can also be rockfall events. It's an area that's fully in motion right now.
Stories entwine around the legendary Morteratsch. The young alpine dairyman Arach has no chance of marrying the daughter of a rich farmer and goes off to live abroad. When he returns as a successful man, the girl has died of a broken heart, and he also takes his own life. To this day, the ghostly call of the beloved can be heard. Morteratsch, Morteratsch. From Morteratsch, the train winds its way over the Bernina Pass. The journey takes about 30 minutes, through ice and snow, to the lonely station of Alp Grüm. Alp Grüm, the last station before heading into Val Poschiavo and Italy. Only by train can this lonely place be reached in winter. When the last train leaves the station, it becomes silent. Only the wind can be heard and the crackling of the glaciers. The moon allows a spectacular view of the mighty mountain massif, even at night. Early in the morning, the first train from Val Poschiavo struggles up the mountain to Alp Grüm. It brings not only people, but also goods to the lonely railway station. The innkeeper, Primo Samedini, depends on the reliable deliveries of the railway. It transports everything he needs for his guests. Today it brings a particularly precious commodity, water. The inn's own spring has been buried by snow and frozen.
Have you got the 100 francs? Well, then we're ready to go.
Twice a week, the railway brings a 25,000-litre water tank. A short break for the railway employees.
I think there's going to be a huge storm today. Well, if it doesn't wind, then it just storms.
Primo Samedini hopes the weather won't get worse. There's a strong wind blowing. It makes the work difficult and dangerous for the men. The locomotive can go in two directions and steers the water tank backwards up the hill. The clock is running. The water tank has to be emptied in the exact amount of time between two trains meeting at Alp Grüm.
Do you think Squid can do it alone?
Primo Samedini is grateful for the help of the railway. The railway workers have installed a cistern here, which they connect to the tank to pump out the water. Snow and ice have buried the water source, crushed the mechanical connection.
I am very dependent on the Rhetian Railway. If they didn't bring the water, I'd have to close my business. We get the water from the mountain, from the Sassal Massone. That's where the Rhetian Railway has its own spring. It's not that it's frozen, it's that the whole spring has shifted because of the strong, fast fall in the autumn. And at the moment, it's impossible to go up and push the spring back. Instead of the water being captured, it just goes down next to it. And we have no way to get at the water. We have very little water coming in, just enough for the daytime operation.
It's not until late spring, when the snow has melted, that the connection can be repaired. In the coming months, the innkeeper will still depend on the railway to deliver water. The men love working in the mountains, even if it is dangerous. They work where others go on vacation. On the way back, the mountain panorama shows Piz Palu and its hanging glaciers. The empty water tank on the way to Val Poschiavo. The hotelier also registers the climatic changes of the last years.
The first years it was very cold, even minus 20, minus 23 degrees. The last years, especially this winter, you get minus 10 to 11, but not any colder. It's funny. But now the train is coming.
With the regional train also comes the garbage wagon. Twice a week the hotel can dispose of its waste this way.
The weather today is not bad at all. It's worse when it snows, when there's a danger of avalanches. Then it's more difficult. But we organize ourselves so that we have fresh produce for at least a week.
Alp Grüm is the highlight of the trip. The warmth of the historic station buffet makes you forget for a moment that you have to brave ice and snow again outside the door. From the very beginning, effective snow removal was a prerequisite for winter operations on the entire Bernina Pass line. Railway employees had to know how the snow behaved. Only then could they control and safely trigger avalanches. Even in the 1930s, there were various methods of getting the snow off the mountain. Cannons and mortar shells were used. And sometimes avalanches were set in motion on purpose by skiers. What no one believes anymore is that witches and ghosts set off avalanches to bring misfortune on local residents. Snow removal on the Rhaetian railway network is still a serious and dangerous matter, especially in the shelters, like here, in a so-called open gallery. The snow accumulates everywhere, even on the walls. The work is stressful and takes place under time pressure. Snow and snow ploughs have to be gone before the next train rolls in. Precise timing is essential for safety on the track. Despite the many years and hundreds of missions, the men are always happy to arrive safely at their Alp Grüm location. Primo Samedini still has to get to Ospizio Bernina today. It's one stop away from Alp Grüm, on the route we took at night. The train is heading north through a pass depression. There it is exposed to the strong winds. Even in dry weather without fresh snow, the train tracks are covered again in no time. At 2,253 meters above sea level, Ospizio Bernina is the highest railway station on the Rhaetian railway. The lonely and windy station is always a new challenge, not only for the passengers, but also for Primo Samedini. Icy, cold and, above all, snowy winters demand a high level of commitment from employees and vehicles. Time and again they have to prove their skills and avert the dangers from the railway. In heavy snowfall, the only thing that helps is the snow blower. The machine runs at a maximum speed of 20 kilometers per hour and can adjust its speed to the snow depth and obstacles. With 2 chimneys, it sprays the snow to the side. Caution is called for. Roads, houses or cross-country ski trails mustn't be covered with snow. Railway foreman Andy Crameri is also working on the snowblower. For him, the day has already started in the night at 2 o'clock.
Our problem is not only the new amount of snow. Of course, we have to take care of that. What is a problem, especially on the Bernina here, is the wind. It can be quite a nice day, like today. Today's a very nice day, but still we have to plan an operation. If there's drifting snow, that's also a problem on the mountain.
The strong wind can quickly gather large amounts of snow, difficult to see and insidious, because there's the danger of an avalanche. This is how snow clearance on the highest railway transversal across the Alps looked back in 1930. A small wonder of the world. Up to 10 employees of the Rhaetian Railway struggled through the metre-high snow walls on the Bernina. Everything was arduous. Manual labour was required. Thick masses of snow pushed the rails apart. They had to be re-measured on site and immediately straightened again. On the cleared track, the Bernina Express is safely on its way. Shortly after Ospizio Bernina, on the way towards Chur, the train passes Lago Bianco, a reservoir on the Bernina Pass on the border between the Bernina and Livigno Alps. At an altitude of 2,234 meters above sea level, it is clearly visible, especially in summer. It takes its name from the milky waters of the nearby Cambrena glacier. From Alp Grüm into the Val Poschiavo to Tirano, it is still a little more than 30 kilometers. For this, the Bernina Express needs about 1 hour, because it goes downhill, and that means braking. The students, Francesca and Raffaella from Milan, are travelling in Graubünden for the first time. Francesca enjoys all the sights on this route. It's really unique how the train spirals up, especially when it goes through the mountains, Raffaella says. For Francesca, it is an ibex that really goes everywhere. The ibex is just the right symbol, she says, a real mountain climber.
No, io sono pugliese in realtà, ma vivo a Milano, sì.
The friends Laura and Valentina from Milan think of a completely different animal. Given the speed of the train, they think of a turtle, because the train is so slow. For Adriano from Bergamo, the train is much more than a mundane means of transportation. He sees it rather philosophically.
To compare the train to a snake is perhaps a bit too obvious. For me, it's more like an eagle because it gets to the top, showing us what we otherwise can't see, because we don't have wings to fly.
After Alp Grüm, the train makes a 180-degree turn. Heading north, the high alpine glacier world shows itself one last time. On the other side, towards the south, the breathtaking panorama of Val Poschiavo opens up. The train winds down into the valley with an average gradient of 7%. With a sometimes deafening squeal, it masters the steepest section of the Rhaetian railway. Invisible at first glance, the threat of global warming. Striking changes are occurring, especially in the high mountains. In Switzerland too, natural hazards are increasing due to snow and rock avalanches, rock falls and thawing permafrost. Vital for the survival of the railway is the protective forest. Forestry engineer Diego Battilani is responsible for the preservation and care of the trees in Val Poschiavo.
The forest protects us from avalanches, rockfalls, landslides, erosion, and is therefore essential for our survival in such a valley. Without forest, we can no longer protect the Rhaetian railway. And then nothing works at all. Here we are logging for the Rhaetian railway, and we have to remove the heavy trees that are too close to the line, so that they don't fall on the railroad line during a storm or with heavy snow.
The maintenance of the protective forest is a dangerous task. Especially on the mountain, trees protect people from natural hazards. Storms increasingly cause great damage and destroy entire forest areas.
Over there you can see this white area. It's about 40 hectares. And on that area, about 12,000 cubic meters of wood have been lost. At the moment, the protection function there is no longer guaranteed. It will take years until the new forest can grow and then take over the function again.
The reforestation takes years. It's still uncertain whether the violent storms will increase in the long term and what impact they will have on the railway line and on the people in the valley, even though they have always been used to living with natural forces. The first UNESCO World Heritage Site structure on our trip is the circular viaduct in Brusio. It is considered the ingenious finale on the Bernina line. Thanks to its circular architecture, the bridge overcomes a change in altitude, and performs a turn of 360 degrees. Its outer surfaces are made of granite, a stone they were able to quarry along the route. This circular viaduct is considered the most original structure of the Rhaetian Railway. From Brusio, it is not far to Italy. The journey takes 4 hours. The train crosses the Albula valley and climbs high into the Bernina mountains. As the highest railway line across the Alps, it connects Switzerland with Italy. On the final kilometers, the train becomes a tram. The UNESCO World Heritage route is proof of entrepreneurial daring and the pioneer's sense of beauty. Only in this way is it possible to rediscover one of its most beautiful landscapes in the heart of the Alps.